Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome guest Kate Bazemore to the podcast. Kate is a journalist covering the watch industry for outlets such as Robb Report, Watchionista, and Gear Patrol. I invited Kate on the podcast so we could discuss the upcoming Watches and Wonders show happening in Geneva in April. We talk about some of the trends that we've been noticing over the past few years, what we would like to see, maybe a few predictions even mixed in for good measure, of course, and many of these we will have to revisit after the show's completion. We also talk about some of our shared time in the state of Wisconsin, as well as her work as a poet. Kate brings some amazing insights to the discussion here, thanks to her years of experience in the industry around watches and jewelry. So I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did chatting with Kate. I will leave links down below as to where you can find more of Kate and her work, both her poetry and her writing about watches and jewelry. A reminder that we will be at Watches and Wonders this year, covering the show live, so keep an eye out for that and make sure you get subscribed over on the YouTube channel, and also you don't miss any of the content coming from that. All right, let's jump over to the discussion with Kate Bazemore. All right, Kate Bazemore, thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's good to see you.
So good to see you. Thank you for having me. I have not done a podcast since before the pandemic, so this is
Wow.
exciting.
Since before the pandemic, that feels like a million years ago.
It does.
So, well, I'm glad this has been a long time coming for us to be able to set this up. I know that you and I always kind of chat when we see each other at events and chat watches. So I'm excited to get your voice here on the podcast and talk about Watches and Wonders, which is right around the corner. It's almost, well, I guess today would be March if it
Mhm.
weren't for, what do you call those? Leap years.
The leap year.
So it
Yeah.
is February 29th as we record this. I'm not wearing a perpetual calendar. And I'll be completely honest with you, I don't own a perpetual calendar watch, Kate.
No, me either. I am fortunate enough to have a friend who has a very cool Breguet perpetual calendar. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to him
Very
today to
nice.
ask how that was.
Yeah, it's a unique thing. So yeah, shout out to Leap Year Day for all of you listening with perpetual calendars out there who care about that kind of stuff. But in every other year, we would be about a month away from Watches and Wonders, which is of course kind of a trade show that itself has undergone quite a bit of change here in recent years. Of course, it used to be kind of Baselworld and SAHH, and is now Watches and Wonders in Geneva. So we will get to that, and we're going to be talking about maybe some of our expectations, some of our hopes for the show, maybe even get a few predictions in there. Before we do, we can do a wrist check. Kate, what are you wearing today?
So my controversial statement is that I actually hate wearing a watch when I'm at my desk. Like
Wow. Okay.
I
Okay.
find it I don't love like typing with it on, but I came prepared for the question. And what I can tell you is I'm going to be traveling a little bit later today.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite watch to travel with that I just think is easy, lightweight, super comfortable is my Swatch Hodinkee System 51.
Okay.
Um, I have a couple of them, but today I'm going to be wearing the white that was like the summer edition. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I love a white watch all year round. Those watches to me are just, like I said, for travel, they're easy breezy. They're, not a bulky metal bracelet,
Yeah.
just comfortable, lightweight. Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I I love it. So that's what I will be wearing on the plane later today.
All right, I can get on board with that. And I have heard people that, they take off the watch at their desk and it interferes with typing, writing, and things like that. So totally understand. Totally understand that. I am wearing an Omega Speedmaster. It doesn't even have a date on it. So this is I probably wear this a few times a month. I've talked about it. It's great on other straps and all that kind of stuff. But I always come back to this bracelet. When they redesigned the bracelet with the 3861 movement, I don't know, just hit a different note for me. So that's what's on my wrist today. I also wanted to ask you about, we recently learned that we have a Wisconsin connection, and this is not a new thing. There are a lot of us here, bizarrely, in the watch world that have coincidentally a Wisconsin connection. I know when I first got into this game, the first few of us that were writing for Hodinkee way back when were like Jason Heaton and Eric Wind, and we kind of just naturally found out that we all happen to be from Wisconsin as well. And then more recently, Nora and Mark Kozlerich, also from Wisconsin, and then finding out that you had a stint in Wisconsin as as well, Kate.
I did, yes. I'm not from there. I'm from Atlanta originally. So I got started in watches originally in Atlanta at Crown and Caliber. That was my first entry point into the watch space. I was the eighth employee there back in 2012 in their first year of business. My then boyfriend, now husband, college sweethearts. We both were from Atlanta originally, and we both wanted to get out. So kind of famous last words, we said, if one of us can get a job out of Atlanta, we'll go there. And he got a job at Epic, a big software
Yeah,
company in
yeah,
Madison, just
yeah.
outside of Madison, Wisconsin. So that is what got us out of Georgia. And we've never gone back.
Wow.
We
Okay.
obviously later ended up in New York City, but yeah, we were in Madison for about 3 years,
Okay.
several years, almost a decade ago. And yeah, it's a great town. The winters, not so much for me. That's a little too much winter for my southern blood.
Yeah.
Um, but in the summer, it's very gorgeous there. And
Yeah.
the people there are great. Like that is what I can say. The friends that we made there, the friends that I have made, not just in the watch space, but in New York City. I have like one of my closest girlfriends is also from Wisconsin, and we met in New York. So
Huh.
yeah, good, very good people for sure.
Well, I'm glad that you had a good experience there. And a few years is a good amount of time to spend there, I feel like. Yeah, the winter, all the seasons are very distinct. All four seasons. Which I always tell people it's you either kind of you love it or you'll grow tired of it quickly. And yeah, Epic down there in Verona is really changed the complexion of that whole part of the town, and including the whole west side of Madison as an example, which is kind of growing out towards Cross Plains and Mount Horeb, seemingly by the day. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that you had a good experience there and met some good people. Any chance that you became a sports fan of any of the sports teams from Wisconsin?
Oh no,
No.
no, no, no,
Okay.
no, no, no. I mean, I'm more of a college football fan than a pro football fan, but like Atlanta Braves, I stick to my Georgia teams when it comes to sports. So
Okay.
sorry to
Okay.
the cheeseheads out there.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, I guess we won't. I'll cross off the discussion around the Bucks and the Packers and stuff like that. And we can.
I did go to a Bucks game with Breitling. I did a little press trip with Giannis, one of their ambassadors, and like that was super fun. Like I can listen. I appreciate any sports culture that has a cult following of some sort. Like I can appreciate, but
Yeah.
my allegiance remains with my Georgia teams, even though the Falcons and the Hawks are not always.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
they can be a little hit or miss,
yeah.
but
Well, on the college side of things, though, you guys got something good going there. So
yes.
so that's
Go
pretty awesome.
Dogs,
Yeah.
UGA, where
Yeah.
we quite strong.
Yeah, absolutely. No problems there. So you mentioned Breitling, and they are a brand that, of course, is not a part of Watches and Wonders, but they generally do some releases leading into Watches and Wonders. At least they have the past few years, including right up to the few days before Watches and Wonders, leading right up to. Um, and that kind of brings up, maybe before we get into the Watches and Wonders discussion, there's been a lot of like really great releases so far this year already. Even from brands that are participating in Watches and Wonders. I know one of the watches that I've been most impressed with is from Zenith, Chronomaster Original with the full calendar. Have there been any releases this year so far that have kind of caught your eye? And of course, where we the last time we saw each other at the Polo 79 release from Piaget, that watch was quite stunning as well. So,
Yeah.
what's been your take on some of the releases so far that we've seen this year?
I mean, I think you named a couple great ones, and Piaget was definitely coming to mind for me. It's like I know this is, an anniversary year for the brand, and I just think they're really having a moment right now. So that piece was super beautiful to see in the medal, and I'm definitely looking forward to what else they have in store. Um, I have a huge heart for Zenith. My first big girl watch, I always say, was a Zenith El Primero. So I have a huge heart for that brand.
Nice.
Um, I mean, I think it's like what I would say more than a specific watch, although I'm trying to now think of a good like example of one that's already come out, but I just love what I'm seeing in the way of dials. That is really what I'm just super excited about in the watch space right now. I think people are doing some really unique things with material. It's like I know Belova released like a meteorite dial. I feel like there's somebody else too that just
Gerard
released.
Perregaux.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
The
Um,
Freebridge meteorite. Yeah.
Yes, also released a meteorite dial, but and Gerard Perregaux right at the end of last year had the very cool piece with the stone dial, where they partnered with the winery and stuff as well. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like when we'd kind of been going back and forth, just kind of brainstorming like what we might chat about today, like you brought up like a really interesting point about like the one-off releases or the releases that we're already seeing, to your point, from some brands that will be presenting at Watches and Wonders, but then like also what does that mean to have the trade show and kind of bigger launches of maybe a new collection or something particularly special. And I think that is something very interesting that is taking shape in the industry, like especially kind of in the wake of the pandemic and how the trade shows have changed. And like I've often made this parallel to the music industry where there used to be such emphasis on the drop of a full album, and there was so much thought put into like the journey from start to finish within an album. And then now musicians, with all of the various streaming services and the way that that industry is transformed, dropping singles, has become maybe more mainstream, and kind of keeping that immediacy and that interest going with the audience. And I see like a similar trend happening in watches where it's not so much emphasis on what's happening at these trade shows, but brands really feel this freedom to create excitement whenever they are ready to launch a new piece. So I don't know if you have any more to say on that, but I just kind of
Yeah.
jumped into that topic.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought about that before, but I definitely noticed that brands, I think they can take more control of their own release schedule kind of throughout the year instead of just relying on a single point, because that's when they know, oh, this is when everyone's paying attention to the watch industry. Now I feel like they can take greater control. I guess the analogy to the music is probably a great thing where they have more control, like where their music appears. It's not like,
Yeah.
well, this is when the CD drops and that's the only way that people can listen to the music or the cassettes or whatever. It's now there's all these options, so they can kind of build hype or really speak to their own kind of like hardcore group of enthusiasts with certain releases, versus maybe the Watches and Wonders is when we see more of the like mass appeal type of releases, because that is when like there are a lot of just kind of in general eyeballs, even beyond just the like watch nerd crowd. Like a lot of people are paying attention to it, or it gets, these releases get brought up in trade magazines and in other more kind of like mainstream magazines as well. So I feel like there's less of an incentive for maybe some of the smaller participating brands to want to compete against, the Rolexes of the world and the Patek Philippe's of the world and all that kind of stuff, who
Totally.
can, like, it doesn't matter for them. They can just drop their releases and kind of suck up all the oxygen in the room, where like a Grand Seiko or a Zenith or a Parmigiani Fleurier or something like that, it's they'd have to really do something crazy to kind of get to be on top of the discussion in those realms, even though they have their own kind of built-in group of like hardcore enthusiasts. to get the attention of the kind of more mass mainstream type people, I suppose it's a different story for them. So, yeah, and that's something that I had noted on here as well, like how this is changing how brands think about releasing their watches. And I feel like I'm noticing more brands kind of releasing maybe one or two specific types of references or an update to a specific collection, but then having more consistent kind of releases throughout the year. And what that does to their strategy and their sales strategy, all that kind of stuff, I'm sure is impacted by all this stuff. But I think of brands like Tudor who have the kind of watches that I would suspect do well to like just people who walk into a retailer and want to buy a watch. And then, on the other times they do the more kind of like the FXD with the black dial. They did its own release later in the year around that because that's
Mm.
more of like a niche dive watch, I suppose, kind of like hardcore realm. And I feel like that's a kind of a good approach to it from a brand of that size, I suppose. So,
Yeah,
so
no, those
yeah,
are really, really interesting observations too. I think, yeah, the industry is just so nuanced, like considering, as you were just pointing out, like different audiences and, how a release is going to resonate with them. And yeah.
yeah, it's a fun to be an observer and it's certainly changed a lot since the days of Basel, um, which is welcome, I think, for the most part. So getting into like maybe even slightly more detail, I think thinking about like the actual trends that we're seeing in some of the watches has been really interesting to see evolve over the past few years. And there's a few that I have note on here that I've maybe noticed, but maybe we both pay attention to slightly different things. So it'd be interesting to get your take on any trends that you see that have been kind of happening in the industry over the last couple of years, what you expect to see continue, what maybe we'll see kind of die off, or if there's something that we're just kind of like missing that you're noticing here. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think some really like two sort of overarching, very positive things that are happening are one, just pieces that are more accessible to variety of wrist, gender, style preferences across the board. So maybe, the more modest sizing or considering size more as it relates to function than a style trend, so to speak, so just more thoughtfulness there about how a piece is wearing. And obviously as a woman and a more petite woman at that, I think that consideration for my wrist size coming off of that trend for many years of like 40 plus
Yeah,
watches. Listen, I love a big watch. I love a big sport watch. Don't get me wrong.
sure.
I that GP that you saw me wearing that was a 42, that feels about the max I could pull off, and that one even kind of surprised me, quite frankly. But
Yeah.
and then the other thing to me is just a little bit more playfulness. I feel like the industry in a lot of respects is like not taking itself as seriously, more adventurous about playing with color, or not so much thinking about something of like this has to be the next timeless watch that somebody's going to pass down from generation to generation. It's like, what if we just want something really fun to wear right now and like enjoy in this moment and not maybe think about the long-term implications of it? Yeah, I enjoy, I think, these objects, yes, the technical aspects that you can take more seriously and a lot of the deep collector aspects, like I enjoy all facets of the industry, but I think at the end of the day, these objects like want to be worn and enjoyed and not be too precious with them. And so, yeah, I brought up earlier with like dials, like I think people are starting to do really like cool, playful, interesting things with dials, maybe pushing the bounds of material, experimentation with different materials and just, yeah, thinking outside the box a little bit. And for an industry that's very rooted in tradition, can maybe sometimes be hard to change. And again, of course, I appreciate that aspect of it too, that history is so interesting and tugs at the heartstrings at times as well. But I feel like there's been a real modernization like in the industry and thinking about like what is resonating with the next generation of collectors.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
What about you? What are you seeing? What do you think? Agree?
Yeah,
Agree?
I actually have noted in here that size trends seem more fluid in recent years, and a lot of brands seem more apt to create more options these days, which I think is a great thing. And I hear less talk of, well, the size trend is going this way or that way, and more of just kind of it seems to be opening up, and people, I hope, are becoming kind of less concerned with, well, here's this like kind of the set of numbers that I need, and it's more of kind of a holistic approach to like wearability, and kind of bringing to life the concept of the watch. You mentioned the Laureato that you were wearing in 42 millimeters, and that has like kind of an integrated bracelet, so like the quote unquote lug to lug isn't that long, and it
Right.
still like has a wearable, the wearability is still like really strong on that watch. So I see that as being like something that, if brands want people to be wearing their watches more often, and hence creating more experiences in them, and creating a deeper relationship with the brand that way, just because they end up wearing it more, then it has to be something that integrates into their daily life more, in a comfortable, practical way. Like, I know that we don't need these things, and they should be fun and all that kind of stuff. And I completely agree with you there too. But it also has to be something that like I want to reach for and wear. That's not going to like get in the way of, when I'm outside doing stuff with my friends or my kid on the weekend, or whatever it is. I think these things should be seen as something that we want to integrate into our lives. And then that is a good way for brands to establish more of a relationship with their customers, rather than just like right out of the gates, these are investment grade timepieces for special occasions and all that kind of stuff. I mean, those things have their time and place, and that's fine. But yeah, I think like the overall practical element of the watch like still has to underpin something, even if it is kind of being more fun and modern, which I see the landscape shifting a little bit as well. And I know I've talked about this before. I also think that um, the like reaching into the back catalog to bring something back in a one-to-one way, or making new collections that are wholly inspired by just a collection that's 40 years old. I think that's starting to wane a little bit, and I think the appetite for customers is more like, well, what are you doing that's new, or how are you pushing this ahead? And I feel like when brands bring back like a one-to-one remake of an old watch, even if it's a really cool watch, it's where do you go from there? Like, well, how do you build on that? It's kind of like you're stuck in that one place now. And unless it's like kind of a one-off special thing, like the Polo 79 is probably a good example of that. Like, it's a modern remake, and it looks, bang on about, like the original one. Of course, it's got a few changes in there, but is that going to spawn its own new collection now of like new materials and complications and all that kind of stuff? Or is it just like this one thing to celebrate its history? And it was the same with the Vacheron 222 the other year,
Mhm.
like I think those are kind of like their own examples. But when I think of like Tudor in the Black Bay, in the trend that was a part of starting, where everybody had to kind of bring back their dive watch from the 70s or something, like, well, how do you build on that? And you even see that with the Black Bay collection. Like, that's a hard thing to kind of modernize, and I feel like they're doing more exciting things with like the Pelagos collection as a result, because that's just kind of a thoroughly new modern vision. So it's easier to play with that a little bit more. Whereas the die has been cast with the with the Black Bay and recalling history, and I think it's the same with a lot of other brands as well. So I hope to see from a lot of brands more kind of, well, here's how we're pushing ahead. And I think, to get back to Zenith for a moment, like I think they do it really well because they kind of differentiate between like their heritage collections and their more
Yeah.
modern. And of course, from the beginning, they've been a very progressive, innovative brand with like the DeFi collection. So how they kind of separate the DeFi in its heritage and bringing that back to celebrate it, as well as on the other hand, it's like, well, this is still fulfilling the original vision of the collection of like doing pushing ahead and really being innovative in a lot of different ways. So I think that's a tricky thing for a lot of brands to balance, but I think they see the success of a watch like the Black Bay, and then they're like, oh, we have to go into our back catalog and bring back this watch exactly as it was. Like, no, like, and that's kind of why one thing about the IWC Ingenieur that we saw last year, I like that it wasn't a one-to-one remake. It felt like a
Mhm.
modern interpretation, and now they have some good bones to like build a whole new collection on if they want to. Um, So yeah, that's kind of how I see it. I'm glad you brought up like colors as well. I feel like a couple of years ago, a lot of us were talking about like these rainbow, color, like super colorful. Like, do you think that like is these big bold colors that's still like a part of the discussion these days? That's like still like working itself out. Do you think where brands are not afraid to play in big ways with colors?
I think so. And like it's interesting you bring up, I do think the rainbow trend that was, still has its place today for sure and was very hot, like you mentioned a few years ago. That is maybe a little bit of its own entity. I think that maybe, especially when like Rolex, did their rainbow piece, it's like that maybe got broke down some barriers to those who maybe wouldn't have typically considered that like volume of color and expression. But I think moving away from that, again, just simply kind of looking at like dial color or bracelet color, even maybe, like the accents like on a dial or something like that. I think we're finding a nice balance, like away from everything has to be rainbow to like, how can we play with color in a more thoughtful way? And maybe it's a single color dial alongside more traditional neutral colored dials.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I did also want to go back to like your previous observation in terms of the like vintage re-inspired pieces and that kind of being a big trend. Great examples that you gave. um but that like, yeah, like are people getting weary of that, and what does, and then like again, if we keep kind of like iterating on the past, like what does that mean that we're kind of building for the future? And I think that's such an interesting thing to bring up this year again with like numerous brands and models that have anniversaries. It's like there's Piaget, Longa has a couple anniversaries, Rolex, like, so I think it's going to be very interesting to see how brands are navigating that in this space and taking that pulse of, how do we create something that is still fresh, but that honors the past instead of just totally recreating something that we've already done. Like that's something I'm really looking forward to
Yeah.
seeing at Watches and Wonders, but and this year as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then you bring up some interesting brands there, to kind of like that we'll maybe kind of have our eye on because of that kind of a thing, and to see how maybe these slightly shifting trends will change what we might would otherwise have expected to see from them. Um, a couple of other brands that I have noted on here that I will be keeping an eye on, or I'm kind of curious to see what they'll do or how they'll handle it. Piaget, of course. Parmigiani is a brand as well that I'm feeling like in recent years is like really close to kind of nailing a few things. I really think they're doing interesting things, and I like where Guido is his head is at in the right place. They're leading the brand. Um, I'm really curious to see how they keep building on some of the concepts that they put forth over the past couple of years. Chopard, I'm always kind of curious about. Lange, as you mentioned, Tudor, of course, I'm always. And then one brand that could also be a sleeper, maybe, is Jaeger-LeCoultre,
Hmm.
JLC. And what I mean by that is, I feel like the last few years they've really kind of gone into some high up realms, into like very complicated pieces and very high end type stuff. But they have an aspect of their history in like dive watches that really interests me. I know they brought back the memo box and the deep sea alarms and stuff like that in various years, but I would love to see them maybe dig into those roots a little bit more in a modern way. So it's kind of what I hope to see from them. That would be really, a bit unexpected for me, but I hope that's kind of like another brand that I hope. And also Chanel is a potential sleeper because I know that they've kind of made a lot of investments in their horological chops over the past few few years. And of course, they have some mainstream success with their J12 and anything like that, but haven't really been able to kind of nail the like watch enthusiast crowd down so much. So to see how they maybe would start to take steps in attempting to do that, is something that also has me curious. Are there any brands that you like particularly like to pay attention to or have high expectations for this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think you named some really interesting ones. Kind of piggybacking off of some of those. I mean, I think Parmigiani, I know last year, I feel like a couple of their pieces like really stuck out to me. And I think what they're doing that's really interesting is like the complications, but keeping like their very minimalist aesthetic. They're very much to me like an embodiment of the, again, maybe somewhat overused quiet luxury trend, but they really are the embodiment of that to me. And again, like pairing that with like complications, but in a design that still looks very elegant and streamlined. So that one is definitely on my radar. I think, Grand Seiko is another brand that, Spring Drive has an anniversary this year. Like they've kind of just, made a splash like in the US. And I feel like they're, maybe a little bit of like a force to be reckoned with this year.
Yeah.
It's like, again, maybe this is a strange statement, and I think it's kind of come more on my radar this year because it was a little more off my radar last year. But I'm curious about some of these like smaller brands and what they're going to bring. Like I think Norcane's been doing some kind of interesting things over the past year. um
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there are smaller brands that are going to be exhibiting at Watches and Wonders, and like, yes, kind of to your point, it's like, who can that be a real challenge to compete with the Rolexes and the longest of the world?
Yeah.
But I that is something like I made all of my crucial appointments of the brands that fill up very quickly, and now I'm going back to like, who have I missed? Like Alpina, Frederic Constant, Gerard Charles, like, what are, again, like thinking about all the various different audiences, like not to be forgotten, the niche audiences, maybe people that are just getting into the space and need more of like an entry point
Hmm.
option, just strictly from like a price perspective.
Yeah.
So that was just something else I wanted to like bring up today that I know is, not going to be the headlines necessarily, but I think it's always interesting to look at, especially in that spirit of playfulness and adventurous, where maybe those smaller brands can sometimes like take more risks because it's not
Yeah.
as much as at stake of how the community is going to respond,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially in a big moment like this.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And to that, yeah, you mentioned Norcane. I think this is their second year. I think they were there last year. And
I
then
couldn't remember honestly as well.
yeah, there are plenty of brands like that. Oris, Nomos, Bell and Ross, Bremont, of course, Baume & Mercier under the Richemont umbrella. Yeah, Frederic Constant, Alpina. There are a lot of brands like this who can do fun things and to your point, like to maybe take a little more risks. Um, I think Bell and Ross has done some really kind of fun things. I know they're capable of doing really fun things, and I like it when they kind of aren't afraid to test those waters. Like that Loom case that they came out with in around Dubai Watch Week. I really like that. And they've had some special editions in the past that I think are kind of fun. And then Vermont. I'm trying to remember if they were there last year as well. See, and these are brands that I feel like have their own kind of built-in kind of like diehard base of fans and enthusiasts. Oris, of course. I don't want to talk too much about that because I think we know what they're doing this year. But these are other brands that I think are really important and kind of serve as a touch point to maybe like a broader enthusiast or collecting community. And I always say you shouldn't have to be wealthy to take part in this in this hobby as an enthusiast or a collector. Like that should have nothing to do with it, and there should be options for everyone. And I feel like another one of the trends is maybe some of these quote unquote exotic materials being like democratized a bit more now, where they can, we're seeing meteorite dials or full titanium cases or carbon cases, and maybe even interesting complications, true GMTs starting to come into brands that are operating in that, $1,000, $2,000 price range set, which is a great thing, I think, for the small brand space, the micro brand, the small independents, who, whatever you want to call them. There's a lot of them out there doing really interesting things. And Norcane, I think, is could count themselves, among that group. So, um, I know that there are also some other watch shows that happen, adjacent to
Yeah.
Watches and Wonders in Geneva during that same week, including the AHCI has an exhibit. And there's another one, I think it's Watch Time or something rather generic like that, that you get like the Zins of the world, that exhibit there as well. So there's a lot of other brands of that stature that I think are doing really exciting things that are kind of around this event at this time.
Oh my gosh. I mean, and I'll do, I think, and maybe some people who know me as well know that I cover a little bit of jewelry as well. And it's come onto my radar that there's also like a small jewelry show in Geneva during the same time as well. And I've just made a couple appointments over there. So it is definitely a time to captivate everyone's attention, whether you're a big brand, small brand, anybody kind of adjacent to the watch space.
Mhm.
I can't wait for the energy, even though it's going to be absolutely madness. It's
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be good madness.
Yeah, it is. It's always a fun week, and it's great to see kind of like, all of our colleagues from across the world at other publications, and that we don't get to see here in New York all that often. That you developed, when you're in it long enough, develop some good friendships with some other people. So I'm excited about that. And to take in some of these other smaller events as well, or even visit the boutiques of like Urwerk is always a fun one, and visit the people there. And uh, so do you have any predictions of what we might see from any of the brands? Do you have any Rolex predictions, or do you have any or I don't know if that's your thing, or if you have any, or what would you like, what would like a watch that you really love to see released by any of these brands?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of what we have sort of organically chatted about here covers maybe the predictions, without being, kind of maybe distilling it and without trying to be overly repetitive. It's like, yeah, I think accessible pieces, like you were saying, like with wearability being a focus, and design thoughtful in terms of functionality, again, as opposed to like style and trends, more of that playfulness, color, things that
Yeah.
you can wear every day. I think, in terms of Rolex specifically, again, it's like I'm very kind of cued in on, there's an anniversary for their GMT. I would love to see some accessible sizing there. There's a watch uh WhatsApp channel that Zoe Abelson, Watch Girl Off Duty, does. And a lot of the ladies in there was a little fiery discussion the other day about Rolex, like making some of their more complicated pieces and accessible sizing, because women are interested in those pieces. So I'll
Yeah.
put that one out there, speaking for that group.
Awesome.
But
Yeah.
something else that I haven't maybe seen like as many people talking about, but um it's there's some anniversary for CERN this year, and I was thinking of their part in the Milgauss and wondering like, is because that may
Ooh.
be something more unexpected or interesting that could happen there. I think
Mm.
everyone's a little focused on the GMT, but I thought, like maybe there could be something there that is a little more, like I said, maybe unexpected, or interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I like where you're going with that. Okay. I feel like every year somebody kind of mentions in the background, new Milgauss is due for something. I think that's one of the last holdouts that has not gotten either an update or moved over to the new 32 series movements for Rolex. So long due, I suspect. And of course, CERN that you mentioned is a particle accelerator there that lies on the border of Switzerland and France, in Geneva, and then some of the amazing work that's done there. I would love to see something with the Milgauss, a new Milgauss done with something around CERN. Sign me up for that 100%. I have a couple of predictions from Rolex for Rolex. I think and I don't know if any of these are any more or less plausible than than the other, but the 1908 that we saw last year, I thought was a really beautiful watch. I think that we will maybe start to see some complications added to that collection. Um, I also think that we will see an extended use of or expanding their use of titanium, rather, I should say. Of course, we saw the Yacht Master get a titanium case and bracelet. This was the first kind of commercial production release of a watch done in their titanium. I would like to see that used in maybe the Sea Dweller range as well as the Explorer 2 range. I think an Explorer 2 would make a lot of sense in titanium.
I
Um,
love that. I'm
yeah.
into that.
Yeah, and that would help with wearability, of course, with a lot of these. And then the cases of I would love to see like maybe a slight regression back to the 5-digit case styles and wearability with like a new GMT collection. Um, yeah, I'm more skeptical of that happening, but I would absolutely love to see it. And of course, all the talk of a Coke bezel returning, which I feel like is part of the discussion every year. With the recently kind of dug up patent, though, I feel like it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time, but I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen this year. And then maybe even see them discontinue the Pepsi bezel until they can figure out the color combination, until they can really kind of nail the color combination. I feel like they've never really been able to dial that in exactly the way that they want it, the blue and the rouge there. So those are my Rolex prediction. Then I think we'll kind of see like they introduced the new Daytona collection last year. I think we'll see additional references added to that line. But boy, yeah, the new 1908 and then a Milgauss. I would absolutely love to see a new Milgauss. Maybe a titanium Milgauss is what we'll get there. They
That's
can't just do the Yacht Master in titanium and leave it at that, right?
No, I think that's a really keen observation that of maybe of anything actually feels the most likely of any prediction that we've made for them,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we shall see.
Yeah,
We
these are
shall.
tough things to predict. Every time I do, it's always like, oh boy, I was way off the mark. And in brands like Rolex and Tudor, sometimes you think they're going to go left and they take a right, and that's just how it is. And of course, last year that was a big year for Rolex. Last year, they had a ton of new releases. Um, some of them were slightly expected, others not. But you look at like the Explorer 2 anniversary that was a few years back, and they didn't there's no redesign, there's no nothing. It just got kind of the updated movement, and that was that. So with them, it's like who knows what's gonna happen. Uh, well, yeah, I'm excited to see what does come from some of these brands, though, and I do hope that we see some unexpected brands like really shoot for the moon and take some bigger shots here. Another trend that I see a lot of is brands kind of going for these go anywhere, do anything watches that are watches that maybe don't really adhere to any specific genre.
Mm.
And they maybe look perfectly inoffensive and handsome, but there's also like a lot of them, so it's hard to like get really excited about them. Whereas I think if a brand kind of really takes a swing and does something maybe more niche or weird, I think that's the kind of the more fun thing that people like us end up paying attention to. But maybe that's just because we're paying attention to watches all day, every day. So
That's so true. I mean, it brings me back, I think, to what you were pointing out at the beginning, that it's so nuanced as we're speaking about it. And I don't envy brands trying to contend with this when it comes with what they're releasing, where it's like, yes, like, do you you need those kind of core pieces for mainstream, for people that are entering in the space that maybe want that very versatile piece for every day, every occasion. But yes, like once you're in the industry, those pieces can just kind of become white noise. And it's like, give me something interesting. Like you said, even if it's weird, even if it's controversial,
yeah,
just like that can be really exciting if it's a very polarizing piece. But then I go back to like, well, okay, but which one do you release at Watches and Wonders versus which one gets its own kind of moment at some other
Mhm.
point in the year. So it's like, again, I don't envy them having to make those decisions with how, again, like multifaceted the world has become with how releases work and how the industry is versus how the collector community is. Like, it's a lot of things to consider with how something is going to land, and you kind of only get that first reveal one time and then
Yeah.
it's out there
Yeah.
and everybody starts chattering about it, and it's
Yeah.
the baby has flown the nest at that point. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of variables here that you could really get caught up in paralysis by over analysis. So that kind of like I could see a lot of brands kind of dealing with that coming into this time of year. So, um, well, whatever the case, we'll be there covering it. Kate, I want to give you a chance to kind of tell us where people can go find more of your writing. But also before that, you are also a poet. Tell me about this. How did you get into this?
so I studied English and creative writing in college. I was not a journalism major. I am just a writer. That
Sure.
is the biggest identity I've ever had. In fact, I have many diaries and journals that I've kept as early as I could pick up a pen and paper. And actually, when I was 8 years old, I wrote in my diary that I'm going to be a great writer one day, even if it's just one book. So
Hmm.
I am bringing that 8-year-old dream to life. So last year, I finished my first full-length collection of poetry. So it's 64 poems. And I am painstakingly working to get it published. I was really hoping to have a publisher secured by the end of last year, but candidly, the watch industry is very busy, especially in Q4.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
this is like our first busy season, and then like the end of the year is like another big push.
Yeah.
So my book got pushed to the back burner, but I am back working with my beautiful, wonderful editor and mentor, Yrsa Daly Ward. If you don't know her work, you absolutely should. She is incredible, and it is a huge privilege to work with her. But I am back getting on task with her to get back in the game of getting it out to publishers, and I'm really hopeful that this year is going to be the year that it gets out into the world. So
Yeah.
poetry is my first love, before writing about watches, and
Okay.
a total change of pace, um, abstract, creative. But here's the one parallel that I will say that I think summarizes my appreciation for both things. Watches are a very tiny real estate to accomplish a lot aesthetically, mechanically, all in a tiny thing that fits on your wrist, which is very intimate. You wear it on the body. Poetry, that medium compared to a short story, novel, whatever, is a very small area of real estate.
Hmm.
Every word that you choose, every piece of punctuation that you choose holds a lot of gravity. It really has to count.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot can be accomplished in the very tiny space of a poem. A lot can be communicated in just a few words. So that is where I see these two passions intersecting.
Hmm. That's beautiful. That's beautifully put. Is there anywhere that people can go to read any of your poetry now?
I share some things on my Instagram
Okay.
occasionally. Um, Gosh, stuff that was published was more like long ago in like literary magazines in college. I'm not sure if I want to direct anyone towards that. I've come a long way since then. But my Instagram is just my name, which is sort of unconventional to spell, but once you see it, you'll know it. So it's Kate, Cait, Bazemore, Bazemore. That's my handle on Instagram. I share some of my own poetry, but just lots of poetry in general.
Yeah.
Also share lots of lovely watches and jewelry content. And if you want to read more of that, I am currently contributing to Rob Report Watchanista, Gear Patrol, and Worth Magazine, which is not always as known in the industry, but it's a financial publication, print and digital, and I cover watches and jewelry in their e-commerce section.
All right, amazing. We'll leave links to all of that stuff down below. So if you're curious, be sure to check that out. You can go follow Kate and all the amazing work that she is doing everywhere. Kate, I can't thank you enough for making the time for me today. It's just been a huge pleasure to chat with you.
This has been so great. It was such an organic conversation. I felt like I needed to try to like overly prepare, but you made it so easy and comfortable to chat about things. And I don't know, I think we're gonna need like a part two, maybe like
Let's do.
after Watches and Wonders
Yep.
to
Yep.
like
Yeah.
recap what we were right about, what we were wrong about, what we think after it all unfolds. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
This was like also just a really good like preparatory exercise for me ahead of the show. So I hope it was for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this stuff. And it's just been so much fun to talk about with you. Yeah, I definitely after the show we can come back and do everything that we got wrong. For it, so.
Probably mostly everything that we got wrong,
Yeah.
everything that surprised us.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.